I'd like to welcome all of you here today to the webinar sponsored by the BYU Management Society. This is Rixa Oman. I'm Executive Director of the Management Society. I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're very glad to have you join us. We're pleased to have David Bradford here to present to us on lessons from the greatest leaders, how to build a billion-dollar company. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. The audio portion can be heard through the speakers on your computer. For those preferring to call in, please note that you can choose that option on the screen panel to the right of your screen. During the presentation, all attendees are muted. In other words, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. This is in order to deliver a clear presentation to everyone who attends. If you have questions or comments, please locate the little question box on the side of your panel and type in your question. There'll be times during the presentation that we'll review these and answer them if we can. Again, welcome. Let me introduce our speaker. David Bradford is known as the human internet. He's been a CEO, board member, and executive at industry leaders in high tech like Novell, Fusion.io, HireVue, and Fluent Worlds. Two of the companies where he served as CEO were both listed in Forbes as two of the 50 fastest growing tech companies in America. When he was CEO of Fusion.io, the company's market value soared to over $3 billion from a nearly standing start. In 2013, he was inducted into the Utah Technology Hall of Fame. He has also been CEO and Executive of the Year for the state of Utah. He's a professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Utah and author of the highly popular book, Up Your Game, 6 Timeless Principles for Networking Your Way to the Top. He and his PhD wife, Dr. Linda Bradford, received the prestigious 2014 Couples of the Year Award for the United States, and they're now in the process of revolutionizing online e-learning for language training. We may hear more about that later today. David is going to share with us lessons he has learned from many of the people he's had the privilege to work with. We appreciate him taking the time to talk with us today about his insights and life lessons. He's a great supporter of BYU, of the Marriott School, and of the Management Society. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to make him presenter and share his screen. David, I believe you can now share your screen. There you go. But we're not hearing you well. Do you want to try that again? Just a minute. Okay, try that.
Okay. How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. And I'll initially share my webcam here. And I want to greet the 300 or 400 people that have joined us from around the globe. I understand people from Brazil and Europe and Mexico and many in the United States have joined us today. So I'm thrilled to be with you. And I appreciate Rixa. I've been a long member of the BYU Management Society. In fact, I don't know if Rixa remembers, but I think we first met back in 2004, 2005 when I was president of the Orange County chapter of the BYU Management Society. So big fan of what you all are doing, and I know that if I were listening to any of you, that I would be learning a ton of stuff today. But for some crazy reason, they asked me to present. And so we'll dive in today. I've got a couple of PowerPoints that I can show you. I'm going to stop with the webcam because so you can see more fully the presentation that I will do and the slides that I will be sharing with you. But I wanted to at least greet you initially and show you that we're still very actively involved in business. I'm actually today at a great little company in Salt Lake City called In What Language, and they are experts, world experts in language translations. So if any of you out there need translations for your company, be sure to contact In What Language. I'm using their internet system today, and so I'm grateful for them. Okay, with that, let me kind of dive in and hit some of these. Hopefully you can see my screen there. And so I'm going to talk to you today about the 4 things that I think are absolutely essential to building any enterprise. We can't all be billion-dollar companies. In fact, there was a book written some years ago called Blueprint to a Billion that I recommend. It was written around the 2000 time frame. And the author of that book, Thompson, studied 20,000 companies between 1980 and 2000. And of the 20,000 venture capital-backed companies, they found 400 of them that had reached $1 billion in valuation. And in that study, he found 7 points that were consistent among billion-dollar companies. I like to focus on these 4 because I think it's something that you, as a CEO, as a C-suite executive, as a manager in your company, that you can have some impact on by using these 4 ingredients to build your company. So, first and foremost, you have got to create a breakthrough value proposition. I'm not just talking about something that's nice to have. You know, you have got to find a pain point in the market. I can remember some years ago, I turned 50 years old, and, you know, I was an athlete as a young man and loved track and field. And so in my latter years, I was participating in the Huntsman Senior Games. And I loved the long jump in high school and long jumped over 20 feet in high school and thought, well, gosh, maybe now as a senior I can long jump 15 feet. And so not a senior in high school, but as a senior in age. Let's be clear on that. And so I can remember I worked on it for a couple of weeks, and I had my steps down, and you know, I approached the board to do this big jump, and I hit the board, and as I did so, I took off and pushed off my left leg. My left hamstring snapped. It was done. I was done. Halfway through the jump, I was screaming in pain, and I can remember people in the entire BYU stadium who were watching those senior games could hear me just yelp in pain. I can remember hitting the sand and just, you know, maybe I got out there 8 or 10 feet. I don't know. But I was in such pain at that time. Honestly, I would have paid $1 million at that moment in time to get rid of that pain. It was so acute. It was the biggest pain I'd ever had in my life. And this is what you've got to look for in the marketplace. What is that pain point that people are screaming about, that they need to eliminate from their lives? When you find that pain point, people are willing to write you a check. Until you find that pain point, they'll look at your technology and say it's nice, it's wonderful, it's cool, but you've got to find that pain point, and then they begin writing you checks. And so start with the breakthrough value proposition in mind. The second thing that I've learned in building companies is to find marquee customers or partners that will create such visibility for your company that your next sell becomes very easy. When we were building Fusion.io, I can remember we identified Facebook as a target customer. And we knew, and by the way, what we built at Fusion.io were solid-state memory devices for corporate data centers. So think about accelerating speeds and feeds off your hard drives back in the IT data center of your company. Well, solid-state memory can help you do that. And we invented a way at Fusion.io that allowed people to self-correct drive failures and these sorts of things, and accelerated the data flows off the drive by 1,000 times over what a traditional hard drive had done. So we had found a breakthrough value proposition there. But now we had to find some marquee customers or accounts that would kind of certify our place in the market. And we did that with Facebook initially. And I can remember our senior vice president of sales, a great LDS guy by the name of Jim Dawson. We had this big corporate-wide meeting that we called together. And Jim, you know, you're always talking about pull the rabbit out of your hat. Well, he had something up his sleeve, and so he rolled up his sleeve and he pulled it out. Here was an order from Facebook for $4 million for Fusion IO solid-state memory devices. That was a marquee customer. With that breakthrough customer, we were able then to go around to any IT data center and say, hey, Facebook's using this. In fact, all of the folks listening on this call today are undoubtedly Facebook users. So when you post that video or post that thought of the day or whatever you might be doing, it's resident and going back and forth on Fusion IO solid-state memory devices in the background. So those are marquee customers that you've got to think about getting. Another way of thinking about it is not just the end user or consumer of your product, but you want to get partners in the marketplace that will kind of certify you. So if you're not going to direct, you don't have a direct sales model, and you have an indirect sales model, who are those partners in the marketplace? I remember in the early days of Novell, gosh, this goes back to 1985. Ray Norda was very, very big, our CEO at the time, on indirect sales channels, so he didn't have to build his own sales force. But we got IBM to come in and begin marketing our products. And when IBM became our distributor of the Novell Network operating system, what a certification, what a stamp of approval on our company and so forth. And with that in hand, we were able to go on and do some great things. We grew that company, Novell. When I joined them, they were at about 70 million in sales, and we grew the company to over 2.2 billion over a 15-year period. The other thing I would say is not just marquee customers or accounts. Also think about who are the people that you surround yourself with in your organization. So let me go to that next slide. You've got to find people with passion and skill sets and expertise that can advance what you're doing. I'm fond of saying that I hire for passion and train for skill. Hire for passion and train for skill. As I have been in the corporate world for, gosh, over 40 years now, I look back on the people that are successful in my organizations, and it was those people that absolutely loved your product, that had an enthusiasm about your product, which made them stay up late at night, get up early in the morning, and that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking about how can I advance that product, that service in the markets, in that marketplace. And so you really have to find passionate people and so forth. So I would say that's characteristic number 4. In fact, I'll insert here my 60-30-10 rule. So this is the David Bradford 60-30-10 rule. I hope you'll all write it down and remember it. It's simply this. 60% of the success of your enterprise is going to relate to the people that you bring into your organization. 30% surely will relate to your product or service, and then 10% is dumb luck. But I will assert that the harder you work, the more contacts you make, the more you show up in life, the more you follow up in life, the greater luck you will have. So 60% people, 30% product or technology. I remember, gosh, it was in the late 90s, early 2000s when the internet had kind of blown up, especially in the year 2000, blown up in a bad way, where all those internet failures were occurring. And we had created a company, and this, I was chairman of the board of a company called Found.com. Steve Young was an investor there, and we had a really cool group of people. But until we found a CEO for that organization that was passionate about what we're doing, was very smart, with the internet bust that occurred, that company wasn't going anywhere. But if you've hired smart people, people with passion and expertise, then they will figure out a way to morph your company around any problems that you might be incurring. So 60% people. Think about people. When I look back at IBM, go back years ago, in fact, it's a book I read. Let me think of the name of that book. The Greatest Business Decisions Ever Made. I hope some of you will go out and find that book. The Greatest Business Decisions Ever Made. I think it's just 18 chapters, but if you go back and you look at that book, you will find out that the greatest business decisions ever made were people decisions. So look at what happened in 1996 to Apple. I'm going to take a sip. Hold on. Apple was struggling. They brought in John Sculley. Things hadn't worked out with John. They fired Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak back in the 80s, the founders of Apple. And but by the mid-90s, that Apple was struggling a little bit. What they did is they brought the founder back into the organization, Steve Jobs, in 1996. They bought his company. It was called Next Computing. They bought Next Computing, and they brought Jobs back in. And within about 6 months, Jobs had been renamed CEO of Apple. That decision by the Apple Board of Directors changed the future of that company. And today, Apple is the most valuable company on planet Earth. But it wasn't a product decision that they made, that the board made. It was a person decision. They brought Jobs back in to run the organization. The same thing happened to IBM. If you look at Lou Gerstner, I want to say the time frame was the early 90s. And IBM, who had this massive success in terms of the mainframe world, they kind of missed out on the super mini computers. They missed out on the PC networking days. And surely they got around to it eventually. But in 1991 or 1992, they brought Lou Gerstner back in as CEO of IBM and completely changed the fortunes of that company. That completely rebounded. Today, IBM is an amazing company. So as you think about building and driving your companies forward, think about people. And the final thing that you all know about is capital. And any company, in order to move forward, needs capital. Now, hopefully, you'll be able to drive your own capital and you create a financial model where you don't have to go out and raise third-party capital. But I would assert to you that in order to grow quickly and efficiently and win the day in the marketplace, you're going to need capital. Now, there are very few companies. I can think of Qualtrics here in the state of Utah and its CEO, Ryan Smith. That company did an incredible job in building $100 million in revenue as a company without actually raising outside capital. Now, eventually, to grow even more quickly, Ryan went out and got investments from Accel and Sequoia and raised over $100 million to establish themselves as the de facto industry standard, and they've done that successfully. But they were that rare company that grew, became a success before they needed that outside capital. But 99% of the companies to win in the marketplace need capital. I think back in November of, 2011, I retired from Fusion.io, and now I was kind of sitting on the sidelines playing a little golf, and this little company came along called HireVue that made a digital interviewing platform. And by the way, back to breakthrough value proposition. When I saw what HireVue had, my immediate thought was, boom, breakthrough value proposition. And the reason and the question I would suggest to you to find out if someone has a breakthrough value proposition is to simply say, gosh, why didn't someone think of that before? Or why didn't some business implement that before? Well, when I saw the HireVue digital interviewing technology, that's exactly what I thought. Why isn't everybody using this? It makes hiring so easy and efficient and so forth. And so I was really captivated by HireVue. But there were 15 companies at the same time that were HireVue-like. They had similar technology that allowed you to go in and pop up a webcam and do a digital interview that got recorded and rated and shared with other people. Well, the reason we won the day on that was because we were the ones that got capital. And frankly, today, if you look at the digital interviewing market, you'll see that HireVue is the 800-pound gorilla in that market space. But it was because of the capital that we raised, and we were able to go out and hire the salespeople, hire the engineering people necessary to move that company forward. So we're about 25 minutes into the conversation, and I know there's a system whereby you can submit your questions to Rixa, and she can pass them along to me, but if there are any questions at this point, happy to take them.
Yeah, David, there's a couple. One person said, what are the best ways to find your passionate and talented personnel who are willing to take a risk? I think that's a question that someone else is. How do you find the best partner and the best, customers and people who are going to work for you? Is there a trick to picking them out or finding them? How do we do that?
Yeah, that's really some very good questions, and thanks for sharing those. I do it in two ways. One is social media. So I am one of those crazy CEOs that actually caught the wave of social media. So I have more than 15,000 LinkedIn connections, 5,000 Facebook friends, etc. But, if you're seen as a leader and you're posting stuff constantly, like in the language learning market. Just the other day, for example, I posted a little video about language learning. I got an email from one of my LinkedIn connections. Turns out this guy speaks 5 languages. He's absolutely passionate about our Fluent Worlds product, etc. He sought me out, but it was because I was on social media constantly posting about language training, language learning. So I would suggest to the audience that if they haven't caught the wave, if they don't have a great LinkedIn profile, if they aren't posting daily on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., they're doing themselves a disservice. Social media is today's methodology to get your message out easily and efficiently. I can't tell you the numbers of people. When I look back and I think about the people that we hired, Fusion.io's big problem when I came in as CEO was they lacked a management team. And the first thing, my job on day one at Fusion.io was to fire the senior vice president of sales. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but knowing what the company needed, that was the first thing I had to do. Now I needed a senior vice president of sales, and we had just raised, I want to say $20 or $30 million in capital. And the people that had invested in us were relying on us to move this company forward. Well, it's a little tough without a senior VP of sales. And so I found, I posted on social media. In fact, I posted on LinkedIn. And my LinkedIn message, and gosh, my LinkedIn connections at that time, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, probably numbered less than 1,000. And I posted the following message, and it simply said, who is the greatest senior vice president of IT sales that you know, ? And I got an email from a guy by the name of Scott McKinley. And Scott was a venture capitalist in the state of Utah back in the 90s. And he says, gee, I met this guy named Jim Dawson at an LDS ward in Singapore a few years back. And it seemed like he sold data storage. You might want to reach out to him. Well, I tracked Jim down, found him, looked up his LinkedIn profile, found out it was exactly what I was looking for, reached out. Long story short, I sent him a football that had been signed by my friend Steve Young saying, Fusion.io, Jim, go for it. This thing shows up at his doorstep. His wife calls him at his then current company and says, where did this football come from? This is signed by Steve Young. And they were living in the Bay Area at times and were big 49er fans. And Jim had even told her, his wife about Fusion.io. But long story short, he came aboard. So be out there and so forth. And that kind of leads up to the next thing, my 6 Up principles. And my book is Up Your Game, 6 Timeless Principles for Networking Your Way to the Top. And I think as I go through these slides, I think some of how I find and recruit great talent and passionate people will be revealed. Rixa, any other thoughts or questions at this juncture?
Yeah, we've had one more. You know, we're talking about how to find people with passion and get them on board. But another person had a question about the capital, and that's how to convince a potential investor that your idea is something that solves the pain point idea. In other words, not just, you know, that's another person we're looking for is who's going to invest to get that capital. How do we find them?
Right. Well, finding them is not the hard problem. The hard problem is what you initially started to say, is to convince them that you have solved a problem in the marketplace that people are willing to pay money for. I mean, I've got the names of 140 venture capitalists out of Silicon Valley, London, New York City, et cetera, et cetera. So finding them, your people can find them. The harder part is to present a value proposition that is so compelling to convince them to invest. And smart investors, you know, look at a number of different things in terms of analyzing a company. In fact, I created, I'm just pulling this up on my phone right now. Let's see if I can quickly find that. I could actually share my screen on that. I don't think I'll do that, but basically there are a series of questions that VCs will ask to determine whether you are fit for an investment by them. I'm going to pull this up on my phone. Let's see. VC. Sorry to get sidetracked a little bit. I think it will be really relevant if. Okay, so okay. This is an email I dictated just last night to my team as I think through my class. And so I could replicate this at some point in time, but here were my top 10 questions that VCs are going to ask. You know, the first thing they're going to ask is, what is the specific pain point that you're addressing in the market? And be data-driven when you come up with that pain point. So just don't think that you've got the pain point identified. Be data-driven when you're studying what that pain point is. Do surveys in the market or otherwise to establish and verify that pain point. 2, they want to know about what your go-to-market strategy is. Do you have a direct sales model? Are you going business to business? Are you going B2C, business to consumer? Are you planning to go through distribution channels? Number 3, what are the price points that you will be pursuing in the marketplace? What sorts of gross margins will this yield? 4, what skill sets, employees will the company envision hiring in its first 6 months or 1 year of operation? And so smart VCs, again, hone in on people. What's the team? As I look at what we've done at Fluent Worlds, I think about Jeff Adams and Tim Donor. Jeff Adams is the godfather of Siri and the father of the Amazon Echo. He's a BYU grad, amazing dude. And Jeff actually led the 150-person development team at Amazon most recently that developed the Amazon Echo. And so when I looked around to kind of determine who's going to build voice recognition into our app that we've created called Fluent Worlds in the market, my search led me to Jeff Adams, and we formed a relationship, and he is now building our voice recognition into our Fluent Worlds app. The second guy that I got is Tim Donor, and his last name is spelled D-O-N-E-R. And if any of you are interested in the language learning market, go out and enter Tim Donor YouTube video on your web browser, and it'll pull up a YouTube video created by the 16-year-old kid out of New York City where he speaks 20 languages fluently. He is an amazing guy. So he's the brand ambassador for Fluent Worlds today. So again, as you're going around and as I walk into VCs with guys like that, it portends credibility. So I'll go quickly through these other things. What individuals does the company need to network with in order to drive their value proposition? 6, what is that breakthrough value proposition? 7, how are you going to fund your business? 8, what barriers to entry are you creating in the market? 9, how do you intend to test your hypothesis in the market? And number 10, how will you ultimately define success for your business? You know, not everybody has to build a $1 billion company. You may want to create a $10 million company, a $5 million company that becomes a lifestyle business that supports you and your family. Hopefully, that was responsive to the last question. Rick said you have one more, or should I dive into my 6 up principles?
No, I think let's go on.
Okay. So in my book, Up Your Game, 6 Timeless Principles for Networking Your Way to the Top, I talk about 6 principles, and I call them my up principles. And you start up your network by first giving with no thought of getting. I know that's a radical concept for many, and I've been so successful building these companies simply because of the people with whom I surrounded myself. It's not due to any great skill set that I've got. I'm not necessarily the smartest person in any given room, but if I can surround myself with people that will fill out my deficits. I'm not a finance guy. I've got an MBA, but it's not really my thing. I don't love digging into the numbers. But hey, when I built Fusion.io, I found Dennis Wolf, and he's an amazing finance guy. And so you've got to find people. And so you start up and you network, and you do it first by giving with no thought of getting. And what I mean by that is the next time you show up at your conference, your convention, whatever it might be, walk into that room with a reverse mindset. Not what can I get from these people, but what is it in my contact database? What knowledge, what domain expertise do I personally have that I can share with other people in this room to bless their lives? Remember this. I remember Cindy Crawford saying this some years ago. Cindy Crawford spoke at an event that Mitt Romney hosted at Park City. And she got up, and the first thing she said is never underestimate another person. Value the other person and what they know and the knowledge that they have. Everybody, in fact, let's say there are 300 people on this webinar today. There is somebody on this webinar that knows something. Everybody in this webinar knows something that you don't know. Rixa knows someone or something that I don't know. These folks that I'm with here at In What Language, Dave and Cody, they know stuff that I don't know. And so how is it that we form those relationships, build those relationships, and uncover those sorts of things? I'm fond of saying when I talk about starting up your network, simply be curious. Remember the C word. Ask questions. Get to know one another. And as you get to know other people, and as you offer your services to them, the law of reciprocity sets in. Just like you move into a new neighborhood, someone brings you cookies, and you then feel an intuitive desire to invite them over to dinner and in some way give back. That's the law of reciprocity in the universe. So you start up your network by giving first with no thought of getting. And as you do that, relationships of trust will begin to form. And when trust exists, everything in your company will accelerate. By the same token, I would urge you to look at your companies and say to yourself, if something's not working, trust is lacking somewhere, somehow. I remember Steve Covey, the famous Steve Covey. His son, Stephen M.R. Covey, wrote a great book called The Speed of Trust. And he points out in that book how when companies merge together, there's a natural distrust that occurs. And when distrust exists, everything slows down. People are afraid to send that email. They're afraid to ask a question in a meeting, etc. So if you're having trouble with your company, and there's a struggle there, and there's probably someone within the sound of my voice that is actually experiencing it right now, ask yourself, does trust exist in my organization? The second thing that you got to do in life is simply show up. The two greatest jobs I ever got is simply because I showed up, unannounced. My first law job I got, I was the most disconnected law school graduate perhaps in the history of mankind. I'd grown up in a little town in Red Lodge, Montana, graduated in a class of 40 kids, and I didn't know a lawyer. And so when I graduated from law school, I was looking around, looking for that job, and I had 3 kids and, you know, a family to support, and so I was desperate. So desperate times leads to desperate measures. And so I remember my wife and I had created a database of like 50 law firms in Southern California. And so I went down there and I got invitations to interview with 3 of them, and that was great. I went down, interviewed with 3, but they all had the same response. Well, we're only hiring from Stanford, UCLA, UC Berkeley. They were West Coast firms. BYU was in law school. I was in the second class. They weren't going to hire me. So I was discouraged, and I remember I was going down an elevator, and I was on the 12th floor at a high-rise on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard and La Brea in downtown Hollywood. And so now I'd interviewed, failed on the 12th floor. Now we were going down. The elevator stopped. It was the 10th floor. And I looked out, and I saw in front of me a sign that said, Ersfeld, and Younger. And I remember Evel Younger had been the former Attorney General or Lieutenant Governor of the state of Utah, or state of California. And so something kind of just like, okay, I'm going to get out. I'm going to see what's going on there. So I got out, and the receptionist was very near the elevator. She reached out, shook my hand, and says, what are you here for? And I says, I'm here to interview for a job. And she says, well, are you here to meet with anyone in particular? I says, well, no, but do you have a hiring partner? And she said, well, let me see if Jim Waldorf is in. So she called back to Jim, and Jim came out, shook my hand, took me back. 3 weeks later, I had a job with Ersfeld and Younger. I just showed up unannounced. And so sometimes in life, to make things happen, you've got to show up. I remember showing up in Sun Valley, Idaho, and gosh, these stories are going to cause us to run a little bit short, but this one story kind of encapsulates these first 3 principles. So you want to start up your network by giving without a thought of getting. You want to show up, and then you've got to follow up. Follow up, folks, is a lost art in the marketplace today. I am amazed at the number of emails that I can send out, and weeks will go by, and people say, oh, I just got distracted, I was doing something else, I was traveling. There's a million excuses that we can come up with. But when you meet someone at a conference, I suggest you follow up within 24 to 48 hours to ensure and concretize that relationship. Otherwise, you're going to be yesterday's news. If you contact them a week, 2 later, they're going to forget who you are, etc. in all likelihood. Follow up, do it today within 24 hours. Follow up is a huge lost art in the marketplace today. So to kind of bring these first 3 principles into, better understanding, it was this fall of 2007, and my wife and I had just moved back to Utah, and she had wanted to get her PhD at BYU, and we've been living in Southern California 2004 to 2007. And but we moved back here in 2007, and Linda started into her PhD program. And I got a call from a former neighbor, and he says, Dave, my son-in-law is moving to Utah. He's a lawyer, a young lawyer. He needs to make connections in the state. Would you mind, meeting with him? The doctor's name was Tom Judd. He delivered my 14th grandchild, I guess, William Moti Halafuka. And so I know Dr. Tom Judd a little bit in that connection. And Tom called me up and said, will you meet with my son-in-law? And I said, Tom, hey, you delivered my grandchild, so appreciate you doing that. Yeah, I owe you one. And so I went to lunch with his son-in-law. Brian Lebrecht was his name. And so Brian and I had a nice lunch, and I gave him the names of some other lawyers in the state of Utah that might be able to refer some business to him. He was a securities lawyer moving from Southern California to Utah. It was a nice little lunch and so forth. And he wanted to know how to get more involved in network into the state. And I said, well, join the Utah Bar Association, attend some of their functions, and maybe something good will happen. So that was fine. About 6 months later, so now it was the spring of 2008, I get a call back from Brian. He says, oh, Dave, thanks for your advice some months ago. I joined the Utah Bar Association, and guess what? I says, what, Brian? He says, I've been appointed chairman of their Speakers Bureau. I says, oh, that's fantastic, Brian. That'll give you some exposure and, whatever. How can I help you? And he said, well, listen, we've got our annual meeting in Sun Valley, Idaho, coming up here in 3 months, and I want to invite you to speak on intellectual property law at the event. They go, oh, man, Sun Valley, Idaho, why are you holding your Utah Bar Association annual meetings in Sun Valley, Idaho? You find it, yada, yada, yada. And I looked it up. I can remember looking at Google Maps or some way, and I found out it was a 5.5 to 6 hour drive from Provo to Sun Valley. And so I, oh my gosh, kind of a hassle. But then I got to thinking, well, I love golf. And so maybe I could find a way. I'll drive up, give the speech, do Brian a favor, find a great golf course there. So drove up the night before my speech, got up the next morning. I had a tee time at 11 a.m. at the Great Sun Valley Golf Course. It was July 18th, 2008. And I drove up and gave my speech. The speech was done. Now I'm walking out of the speech. And a young lawyer comes up to me and starts asking me a few questions about intellectual property law. And we're chatting. I remember there was a piano bench in the middle of the lobby of this hotel where they're holding this function. I reached down and just kind of absent-mindedly picked up this white sheet of paper, and on it said, Keynote Speaker Conference, Steve Wozniak, inventor of the Apple computer. Oh my gosh, Wozniak speaking at this thing? And, being from the IT world, I was kind of blown away by this. But now I had a dilemma, and my friend Cody, who's with me here today at In What Language, will appreciate that. So Cody, now I have a problem. I can either go listen to Steve Wozniak speak, or I can go play golf at the world-class Sun Valley Golf Course. Well, my natural predilection was to go play golf. But that day, that time, I made a right decision that would have a massive impact on this company and what happened. And so I chose to listen to Woz. And so I went, and there were 500 people at the event or something like that seated there in the auditorium. And I says, well, if I'm going to skip my tea time and I'm going to listen to Woz, I'll sit in the front row. So I walked down to the front row, and I sat down, and I reached over to the young lady that was sitting next to me, and I introduced myself, and I said, I'm David Bradford, and she says, my name's Julie Roebuck, and I says, what are you doing here? And she says, well, I'm Steve Wozniak's executive assistant. Now, this goes to my dumb luck theory, right? 10% of your success is dumb luck. That was dumb luck that day. But I'd shown up, and when you show up, good things happen. So I told her a little bit about my background, and the next question from her kind of stunned me. This was after maybe 2 or 3 minutes of visiting, and she said, Woz loves to meet people whenever he goes out to deliver these keynotes, given your background in information technology, would you be willing to stay around and visit with Steve after his speech? I'm going, wow, amazing. So I'd be honored. And so she rushed me up when Steve got done giving his speech and introduced me and handed me a business card that I still have today in my card because it's a unique business card. It's a metal business card, and I'll pull it out here in a little bit.
We're down $700.
Steve handed me the card.
$340.
Yeah.
And so I then took that card.
Why don't you call them and say, hey, we just got...
Well, I'm hearing a little sound in the background. That's okay. But he handed me his business card, and the next point is to follow up. We had a nice conversation. I told him a little bit about what I was doing at Fusion.io, drove the 6 hours back to, Provo, thinking all the time, how can I get WOZ involved? And you know that Wozniak gets hit up every day for some investment or some company. But, just hoping beyond hope, I followed up with an email and sent him an email and said, would you be willing to join our advisory board? Long story short, within 24 hours, Woz had gotten back to me saying I'd be honored to join your advisory board. And it really changed the future of Fusion.io, I've got to be honest. In fact, within 6 months of Woz being named our chief scientist, we were named by Business Week as the most innovative company in the entire world. Little Salt Lake City, 100-person company, most innovative in the world. Now, that wasn't me, certainly, but it was Wozniak. And so this goes to surrounding yourself with the right people. It goes to giving, because, heck, I wasn't expecting to get anything out of my trip to Sun Valley other than my going out and playing some golf. Instead, it turned into this great meeting with Woz and ended up joining Fusion.io and really making a difference in that company. The last couple of things I want you to pay attention to in my 6-up principles are to link up. And when you link up with people, do it in a personalized way. I'm just going to rush through these next couple, and then we'll leave just a couple of minutes for thing. But I think linking up, and the way I describe it in the book, is probably as powerful a principle as anything that I've talked about today. You've got to do it in a personalized way, and I have many stories in the book about linking up and do it in a personal way. The next thing you've got to remember in my up principles is to be a stand-up person, and I mentioned that kind of at the beginning of my remarks today. And being a stand-up person relates specifically to your character, to your integrity. Because you can abide by every other principle that I've talked about today, from, following up quickly to showing up and so forth and so on. But if your reputation doesn't precede you in a positive way, nothing else is going to matter. People aren't going to want to do business with you. So realize, especially you young people that may be listening today, that never do anything in your personal or your professional life that is going to put a blot on your reputation. In today's world of social media, that takes on, triple importance, because when you say something inappropriate or inadvertent, I think of the president of the PGA of America, the Professional Golf Association, a couple of years back, he made a silly comment on Twitter about some European golfer being kind of a girl. And within 24 hours, 48 hours, he had been dismissed as president of the PGA of America. Be careful what you say on social media. Be a person that honors your contracts. Be a stand-up person. And the final thing that I talk about is scale up. And this is all about work. It's both work hard and work smart. So I spend time every day building up that network, posting, etc. The word network is not net eat, it's not net goof off, it's not net golf, although I wish it were from time to time, but it's network. And so in order to connect, and at the end of the day, this is all about building and forming long-term personal relationships that can make a difference in your life. And it may not be the next day. It may not be tomorrow, you know, but it could be years down the road. I remember Dave Checketts I met, gosh, back in the 80s when he was president of Utah Jazz. And it was 23 years later that Dave reached out to me on something, and we formed a business relationship about raising money for international sports franchises and so forth and so on. But maintain those relationships, those friendships, because they can come and bless your life years down the road. Well, it's 1:55, and so Rixa, maybe some other questions have come in, and I'm happy to respond in the next few minutes to anything else that may have.
Yeah, if there's anyone else that has a question that they'd like to put up, we'd be glad to hear about it. Personally, I have really loved the ideas of following up and showing up. It shows that dumb luck may work, but I think it only works when you put yourself in the right position and you show up.
Right.
Without doing some of those things, the chance, the coincidence, the luck, those kinds of things are not going to be put into play unless you've done something. A couple of questions that I think are very interesting. What was one of your greatest past failures?
Oh gosh, I had a start failure back in 1984. It was about a 3-month sojourn. I got into the computer industry in 1980. Yeah, 1980. I went to work for a company called Prime Computer. This was pre-PC days, and Prime was a great company, and I'd been there almost 5 years, and now I kind of wanted to get out on my own and do some other things. And I always had a proclivity to go out and do some things in the business world. And so I morphed my success at Prime Computer into a company called Businessland. And Businessland was a company like Computerland. It was early days of the PC where you could walk in off the street and buy your network and buy your personal computers and, you know, so forth. And so I got the job as the general manager of the Businessland store in downtown Los Angeles. 3 months later, I was out of a job. Now, I could blame that on some of the people that were in my organization, but at the end of the day, I was the person that owned it. I was accountable, and there was a mistake made in some accounting, some revenue recognition, and they let me go. And it was a shocking day for me, and so forth. So be careful with the people that you're surrounding yourself with. But I will say this, the people that succeed in life take those failures and turn them into success. And so my next trip, shortly after the Businessland fiasco, I found myself in Utah, and I walked in on Novell. And that started a 15-year career at Novell, which was great. So, yeah, I've had some failures for sure. I also remember missing that free throw when I was a senior in high school that would have got us in the state championship finals. So you want to talk about a start failure. It was that as I made that motion to make that free throw, somehow my elbow froze and my ball came up short and we lost the game and lost the state. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that those are great because we've all had mistakes and failures, and it's those people that can move on and learn, as you said, and grow from that. Someone else had a question. Do you find that these same principles work in the nonprofit world?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they may be of accelerated value to someone working for the Cancer Society or for the Forever Young Foundation, etc. The ability to form relationships and do fundraising and so forth. Man, in fact, I remember a couple of years back, Forever Young Foundation took my book and stuffed it into their annual meeting to each one of their attendees. Yeah, they work really effectively in the nonprofit world.
Another question is, what things do you do personally, maybe daily or weekly, to keep sharp and to keep moving and current and on top of what you're doing?
Well, I remember years ago, someone told me readers are leaders, readers are leaders. And so I try to read as much as I can and keep up. I do have a daily workout regimen, and I think keeping yourself physically strong is really important. So I find myself at the gym every morning around 7 a.m. and do about 40 minutes. I usually do about 20 or 10 minutes of cardio, and then 20 minutes of weightlifting and so forth. So I try to keep myself in decent physical condition. And then I suppose the thing that people know me most for, in fact, if I had I can pull up my webcam here. Let's see here. I'll pull that up just to show people that I kind of live what I talk about. Here's my to-do list. Can you see that, Rixa?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just one page, it's 2 pages. And so every morning I find myself updating this. And so this morning, or a couple of days ago, so this says my to-do list, Friday, January 29th. And so here's my list of to-dos, and then I keep updating it, and then every Thursday or Friday or so, I update it, and I'll write in special notes, etc. But so that's a personal habit that I have, and everybody says, "Where's that Bradford to-do list?" So,
well, that's great. You mentioned, somebody asked 2 ways to find people. One was through social media. What was the second one?
Well, certainly social media, but then the second thing is you have got to show up in life. And, every one of us are busy in church. We're busy in all sorts of different things that we're involved in. And, we have to make choices in life. I remember Dean Rex Lee, who became Solicitor General of the United States and a really amazing lawyer that was really the founding father of the BYU Law School. I remember talking to Rex about that one time. And I said, how in the world, with 3 kids, did you finish #1 in your class at the University of Chicago with all your responsibilities in church and otherwise? And he said something that was really interesting to me at the time. He said, there's a time and a season for everything that you do. He says, in those 3 years of law school, I completely dedicated my life 100% to my law career. I knew that was what I was going to do for my life. And I set aside, and my church calling maybe did not get the, attention that it needed to, and so forth. And so sometimes you just have to make decisions in life. I was talking to someone this very morning about, hey, I want to go out and play some golf with you. And the reply was, how can I take 4 hours out of the day when I'm running a company to go off and spend 4 hours on the golf course? Now, sometimes you can do some pretty good networking on the golf course, but there's a time and a season for everything.
No, that's great. There's a lot of other questions, but a lot of thank yous as well for sharing your experience and sharing the things that you've learned. And I think it shows us that in everything we do, there are opportunities. There's ways that we can develop and learn and help others in what we're doing, and I think that just makes such a difference to have that mindset that we're not out there just to build ourselves. We can help others, and in doing that, we build relationships and we move from there.
Well, as a kind of a closing note, I will say this, and we still have close to 200 people on the line, and so that's terrific. But I want to encourage you to go out and connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. Hey, heard your webinar today. Thought this was a great point, or gosh, why didn't you talk about this more? I'm open to constructive criticism as well. And so, connect with me on LinkedIn and, go out and do some of these things on social media. Also, I think it would be great if you went out and downloaded our Fluent Worlds app. It's a way cool app, and any feedback on our Fluent Worlds app would be really appreciated. So here's that, and you can see Fluent Worlds, and now people traveling through the comfort of their mobile device or their tablet can travel through 3D virtual environments while learning a foreign language. And so that's what Fluent Worlds is all about. So that's a fun one, and if you know computer programmers, engineers, scientists, experts in language learning, whatever it might be, we're always open to connections in that way. So anyway.
Thank you, David. This has been fascinating to listen to. I hope they do go to that app and the website, because you were showing me that earlier, and it was fascinating. But yeah, it's been a fun time, and to hear your experiences and what you've learned and sharing that with us. We appreciate your sharing them and the lessons you've learned. I want to thank all the audience for being on the call. You'll be sent a short survey after. We'd appreciate your filling that out so we know what to do in future webinars. This has been recorded. It will be posted on the BYU Management Society website. You'll go to resources, and you will need to have your login for the society to get to that. I'll send you all instructions. David, again, thank you so much. And
sure.
thank our audience for being on the call. It's been a fun hour to spend with you all. We hope that you'll all continue to be engaged in your local chapters of the Management Society. And thank you, and have a wonderful day.